I love a good underdog story, a story about somebody who starts from nothing, works their butt off, and ends up becoming successful. This book, Never Enough by Andrew Wilkinson, truly is that story. It's a story about a guy who starts from nothing, moves in with his parents, drops out of college, ends up becoming a barista, learns a skill, and then uses that skill to build a business, which gives him the capital to then become a full-time investor. It's an incredible wild ride, and at the end of reading this book, I didn't know whether to be inspired because of his wild ride and all the success he achieved, or whether to feel like I just read a cautionary tale about what ends up happening when you have too much money and a lack of meaning. So I really recommend this book, but the reason I wanted to make this video on the 5 lessons I learned from a billionaire is because I've been following Andrew for years, and I've had the unique opportunity to interact with him a few times on a Q&A, AMA, so I've asked him a few questions that were very personal, and I wanted to include them at the end of this video as a kind of bonus. So if this topic interests you, I encourage you to keep watching, like and subscribe, it helps a ton. And without further ado, let's dive right in. The first lesson I learned from Andrew is being curious and observant can completely change your life. While Andrew's working at the coffee shop, he sees a couple of guys, Jeff and Chris, would come in every single day, work on their laptops, and be ordering coffee. And eventually, Andrew starts to get curious. He asks them what they do, and he ends up finding out that they have a web design agency, where basically they build websites for local businesses, sell them, and in that exchange, they make a profit. Andrew starts to ask them a ton of questions like, where do you get your clients? How much do you make? What do you actually deliver? In that exchange, he ends up realizing that what they're doing is not really rocket science. And he goes to a local library, checks out books on web design. And I love this passage from page 52 because I think it really encapsulates what he was doing at the time. So he says, night after night, I upgraded my skills from kludgy Dreamweaver HTML to slick modern web design and development. I realized that with a few manic nights and a couple of good books, I could basically learn anything. I had found college brutally boring, offering too little of the information I actually wanted to learn. Now, reading these books and learning on the fly, I realized I was an autodidact, a pretentious way of saying I preferred teaching myself to be taught. It was all in a book. I loved this section because it really put into full focus a couple of things for me. The first is being curious and asking questions can lead to incredible relationships and ideas that you wouldn't have had you not asked the questions in the first place. I think back to my career and how many times I had interactions with my colleagues or friends, and just by having an interaction with them and asking questions, I got ideas that completely changed the course of my career. It's how I got into tech in the first place, because one of my colleagues was working in tech and I was peppering her with questions like, how did you get over the interview? What did you put on your resume? How much do you make? All of these questions that led me to where I'm at today. The second thing that I got from this section is how basically anything can be learned if you just double down on trying to develop a skill. And that one skill ended up helping him create MetaLab, which was his design agency, became a multi-million-dollar design agency that gave him the capital he needed to become an investor. So all of that happened by simply asking questions and reading books. The second lesson I learned from Andrew is that your success will come from the unique combination of skills you pick up in different places and interests. So eventually Andrew is bidding for work on a job board, and he ends up winning one for about $2,500. It ends up being a little bit more because of the exchange rate between US dollars and Canadian dollars, but he has this realization on how he developed his skills to be able to win that project. And it's on page 53. So he goes, to Caven, this was just another project. To me, this was the most incredible opportunity of all time. I had somehow found a job that fit me perfectly. It combined the sales skills and ability to talk to anyone that I'd picked up as an unpaid computer salesman and barista, the tech skills I'd learned from trying to install video games on my parents' crappy old computer, and the interest in design and business that I picked up from dad. More importantly, it appealed deeply to the little boy in me. Nobody, and I mean nobody, could tell me what to do. I was an entrepreneur, the owner of the company, the boss. So if we break down that paragraph, there's 3 skills he learned from 3 completely different places. The first is sales skills and the ability to talk to people from being a barista and an unpaid computer salesman. It was a job he had in his younger years. Tech skills he learned from trying to install video games on his parents' computer, and then an interest in design and business that he picks up from dad, because his dad used to be a bookworm, or still is a bookworm, had a bunch of business books in his library shelf. Nonetheless, when I read that section, it put into focus on how your success is going to come from all of these different companies you work for, all of these books that you read, all of these weird little passions and side projects that you're doing. Like, it's going to create this unique combination of skills that eventually will come together to help you become very valuable. And eventually you end up finding a passion that you're like, hey, I'm suited for this because I've learned all of these different skills. So I loved this section, and it really put into full focus how your success will come from all of those different skills you pick up along the way. The third lesson I learned from Andrew is that your successes and failures will inform your other ventures. So Andrew is a serial entrepreneur. He started a bunch of businesses, some of them wildly successful, other ones not so much. At one point, he had a cat furniture business that didn't do so well, but he has a great passage on page 76, which talks about how his successes and failures informed his other businesses and how he thought about this journey of being an entrepreneur. So he says, what I didn't know at the time was that this would only be the first of many business failures. My partner Chris would later come to call money bonfires. Poorly executed ideas where the numbers didn't work out, often run by the wrong people. And if anything, this one would look like a quaint little campfire compared to some of our future nuclear bombs. But each one would teach me something. The key was to make sure that I didn't go all in on one thing, one business, and that I not only tried to learn from each mistake, but that I did so across everything that I did. That each business success or failure informed another business. We like to joke that we stuck forks into electrical sockets for a living, hopefully learning something from each volt, eventually getting better at business. So I love this line because it's so true how everything that you learn, whether it be a success or a failure, is going to inform the other things that you do. It's going to inform your decision making. And as long as you take the lessons from that failure no longer is a failure. It ends up becoming feedback. So I love this passage because instead of seeing the things that go poorly as a failure, look at it as a hypothesis that you tested, right? You said, hey, if I do this thing, then this will happen. If that thing didn't happen, ask yourself why, document the reasons why, and then use that information to inform your next decision, your next venture, your next business, because at that point, again, your failure is not a failure, it's feedback. The fourth lesson that I learned from Andrew is to realize that there are sketchy people out there and to trust your instincts. So this is a darker lesson, but it really came from when Andrew was going from business owner to investor, and he ended up putting a CEO in charge of one of his businesses, and that CEO turned out to be a shark. And when Andrew and his business partner Chris were thinking back on all of the weird interactions they had and all the things that didn't add up, they were like, man, we probably should have caught this earlier. Like this guy's story didn't add up. But when I was reading this section, it really put into full focus on how we need to trust our instincts when we're interacting with people, because there are sketchy people out there, there are manipulative people out there, and even though it's not a great way to look at the world, the reality is that there are people out there that don't have our best interests, and we need to trust our instincts when we're interacting with people, when they're saying things that aren't adding up, or if they're telling us a manipulative Machiavellian plan. We need to realize that if they can do that to somebody else, if they can think that plan through with somebody else, because at one point the CEO gives a very manipulative plan to Chris and Andrew on how he's gonna basically kick out a CEO of one of his companies. Like, if we are hearing that, we should realize, like, man, if this person can do it to somebody else, they can do it to us. So it really put into full focus on how we need to trust our instincts because they're stronger than we think. And the fifth lesson that I learned from Andrew's book, Never Enough, is that it's about the journey, not the destination. It's about the process, not the payoff. So Andrew eventually finds himself in a position where he's very successful. He's got a ton of businesses making millions of dollars a year. He's a successful investor, but he finds himself in a very odd position where he's lacking meaning. He's making all this money, but he doesn't know where to spend it. So Andrew has a great paragraph on page 251 that I think summarizes this book nicely and his observations. And it's this: the emptiness of making money taught me something I had been so slowly learning, that the payoff wasn't the point, it was the process. The act of building something, of designing the life you wanted, scratching itches and solving problems, the struggle of creativity, helping people reach their potential, the flow state, the journey itself. It's also obvious in retrospect. If $1 million didn't give me joy, why would 1,000 more millions? We all know this. We've heard it a million times, and yet everybody, myself included, seems to need to learn the lesson the hard way. As G.A.K. Chesterton put it, to be clever enough to get all that money, one must be stupid enough to want it. I thought that was an excellent line because so many times we focus on the result that we want from the process itself. So instead of us focusing on developing our skills or getting better at what we're doing, so many times we focus on the money that we'll make or a certain date or a certain milestone. It's like, when you're in school, you have all these ideas of things you're going to do when you finally graduate. And it's like, man, if I just had that degree, and then you graduate and now what, right? Like you have to go out and find a job or build a business or do something to get you income, right? To be financially secure. But nonetheless, like, it's really about all the experiences you created while you were in college, the first job that you had, or the friends that you made, or the relationship that you developed, all those skills that you created along the way. Like, that's what the focus should be on. It shouldn't be on the payoff. Again, results are important. You can't live your life just focused on the process. You have to have results. But what Andrew's saying here is that it's really about reaching your potential. It's about the flow state. It's about getting better. It's about developing skills. Like, that is really, at the end of the day, what's the point of all of this? It's about the journey. It's not about getting to a certain destination and thinking, oh, that's what's going to make me happy. It's like, no, it's the day-to-day, getting a little bit better, seeing your projects realized. That's what's going to make you feel fulfilled in the long run, not the money you make or the results you get. That's all temporary and ephemeral. So now let's talk a little bit about the bonus lessons I learned from Andrew's recent Q&As and AMAs that he did leading up to this book launch. So the first is I asked Andrew a question about, how do you know if you have something that can become successful? Like, how did you know that MetaLab could become what it is today? And the question behind the question was, how does somebody know if they're working on the right thing, basically? And Andrew gave me two pieces of advice. So the first is he says, you got to make sure that you're doing transactions that are win-win, i.e. you sell something, somebody feels that they got value from that thing, and it was a fair trade. And the second thing that he said was, it's very hard to predict whether or not you have something that will become successful. Like, there was no way he could have known that MetaLab was going to turn into what it is today. He also gave the example of Airbnb. Like, very difficult to know that an app, a website for letting people rent out their rooms, very difficult to know that that would become a multi-billion-dollar company. So he said the advice is basically to focus on what's working, stare at your feet, and move forward. Basically, think about what's working when it comes to your transactions, whether you've created something that's giving people value or you're selling something that people feel is win-win. Like, focus on that. Stare at your feet, i.e. stop looking at what other people are doing, stop looking for information, like, just focus on what's actually working in your business or in your project, and then just keep moving forward. I thought it was excellent advice that I got from Andrew. The second piece of advice that I got from Andrew from his recent AMAs and Q&As is the two qualities in successful entrepreneurs. And it's that they have a very high pace, meaning that if an entrepreneur wants to create a business or do an idea, like, they're not going to overthink. They're not going to do all this planning. Like, they have a very high pace. He gave the example that if him and Sam Parr, co-founder of My First Million and The Hustle, if him and Sam had an idea, they would have a name, a logo, and basically everything ready to go that same day. So he said successful entrepreneurs have a very high pace, and they're also reading all the time. So always getting more information, developing their skills, leveling up. So those are two things that successful entrepreneurs have in common. And finally, a bonus lesson I got from Andrew was his thoughts on mentorship. So Andrew said that he's never had a formal mentor, in the sense that he's never gone up to somebody and said, hey, could you be my mentor? A lot of successful people say that they don't approach mentorship that way because they are basically going to invest all this time into somebody that they've never met. It's hours of their life that they have to dedicate to this random person that reached out to them on an email. So what Andrew was saying is a more logical and practical way to approaching mentorship is to put yourself in rooms that you don't belong in, surround yourself with intimidating people, and then just copy what they do. I thought that was great advice because when I think back to my career, that's exactly what I did to learn new skills and level up. I surrounded myself with very smart, very sharp people. I put myself in rooms where I wasn't the best or the smartest, but I forced myself to level up by copying what the successful people were doing. And also my colleagues were willing to take the time to help me develop new skills and ways of working at the company that I was at. So I thought it was a great piece of advice when it comes to mentorship. So those are 5 lessons I learned from Andrew's book, Never Enough, and also his recent Q&As and AMAs that he's done over the past few months. I hope you found value in this video. If you did, I encourage you to like and subscribe and consider checking out my newsletter. The link will be in the description below. And like I always say, wherever you're at, I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.